Well, my name's Lesley Cairns, and I was born on the 22nd of February 1930. So I've got a birthday coming up very shortly. And I moved up here to Queensland with a 5-year-old daughter, and I beg your pardon, a 3-year-old daughter and a 5-year-old son. My husband had been in North Queensland. He was very involved in the Second World War, and they were brought out of New Guinea for rest and recreation there before they were sent back in again for that dreadful, dreadful fighting. And when he came back to Victoria, after some time, we owned a business in Ararat. And I was home with a lovely warm fire and 2 small children, whereas his warmth was just the cold wind blowing in the front door of the shop, and it was freezing. So he came up for a look round Queensland, and when he came back again he said, well, I've taken the option on a business in Maryborough, which is 200 miles at least north of Brisbane. And I nearly died. In those days Brisbane was the other end of the world, let alone this way. But anyway, up we came, and the business that he had taken an option on was Arch Caswell's. And Arch Caswell had been a prisoner of war right through the Second World War. But I'm the only one here now. It's been a wonderful place to grow up with children. It's been a wonderful place to work. And as this interview is about the Toy Library, that was a very, very special place for me to be. I was never involved with it when it was in, and when we were at the 40th anniversary, I learned several things that I didn't know about it and the people that had helped here, and then it was decided, I don't know why, to be moved down where it was. And then the Department of Family Services advertised that they were putting on a program of train a trainer in personal safety, and I was there. And then when the Toy Library opened, I went in as a volunteer. And it wasn't any time at all before that I was put in charge of the Toy Library, because we worked as a group of volunteers. There was the toy librarian, Ruth, and several other people from the Anglican Church came along. But as I said, we worked as a group of volunteers. I used to walk the streets with pamphlets telling people what we were doing, could they come along, and slowly they came along. And then at the end of the year, our young minister from the Anglican Church by the name of Jeff Hoyt came out and said to me, how are things going? And I said, well, not really well. Everybody's saying you're doing wonderful work, you're doing wonderful work. And then Ruth's husband said, Ruth, what are you lot doing for insurance? And Ruth said, we haven't any. And he said, well, I think perhaps you'd better stay home until you get some. So Jeff then took it back to our church and said this is just something that the Anglican Church really needs to use. And he contacted the people that had known what we were doing, and then he took it back to our committee, and they, through Brisbane, got permission for us to be working under the auspices of the Anglican Church in the whole area. So that was when we really went ahead. And that's how I became, well, I suppose, the leader of the Toy Library. Alan Brown, I think, was the mayor at the time, and I'm always extremely grateful to the council that they never ever charged us any rent at all. We started off as a Thursday, and then some of the heads of the ladies round in March Street, what are they called now? I'm not too sure what they're called, but one of their ladies was working there, and she brought her boss around to sit and watch what we were doing and said, yes, this is suitable for our children to come around. So she used to come around in a bus, and she'd pick up some of the children who had been in the program round there and bring them in and then take them home afterwards. So there were people really who would not have had the advantage of being in a preschool or any of that work until they came to us. Well, it was the Women's Crisis Centre where they were, and of course no one was supposed to know where it was or have their phone number or anything like that. But as I said, when they heard about us and came, saw what we were doing, and that was wonderful. And then, of course, we had a lot of littlies whose mums had come from overseas, from the Philippines, and had married an Australian dad here. And in some cases, they were having great difficulties because Dad was out from sun up till sundown, and Mum was home still speaking very little English, and we had some very, very frustrated little children who would come in, and it was wonderful just to be in with someone else and to know that they could relax and to ask questions of how do you do this or how do you do that. I had one lovely little girl that I brought in because I knew that her mother was speaking excellent English, and she'd arrive in, and provided no one had put on this lovely tartan skirt that she loved, everything was all right. But if she arrived late and someone had borrowed the tartan skirt to dress up in, we had some big problems until we could work that out. Lots of problems. One little boy, I remember, was having trouble in the kitchen, and he had a proper saucepan, not a pretend one. It was quite a heavy saucepan. And things weren't going so very well, and he picked up this saucepan and he threw it. And I took a deep breath, and when it hadn't hit anybody, I went over and I picked up the saucepan and I said, "You poor little saucepan, were you hurt when that happened?" And he came over and cuddled me and yelled, much as if to say, "What do you think you're doing? I'm the one's upset and you're cuddling a saucepan." But we got through that. There were children who used to bite. And of course all of the helpers who came in were very aware. There were a lot of mothers about my age from the Anglican Church who used to come in, and some of them brought their grandchildren. But one little boy, I can't even remember his name, but he had a habit of biting. And it's pretty hard to cure someone with a habit of biting. So I watched, and in the end I realised that I was getting all the hurts and he was getting the biting going, and then I decided if I pushed back in his mouth and hurt him, it evened things up. And in no time at all, we'd stopped. Jeffrey was his name, and we'd stopped Jeffrey from biting. But we used to have a cup of, and the children of the Philippines, when they were having a birthday party, there were several of them there, and all the mums got together because naturally they were comfortable speaking their own language and in groups, and they would say, "We'll have a party," and they brought in the most interesting food. It was absolutely wonderful. Lovely times. We had sand pits that caused a bit of trouble. Everybody was quite welcome unless they threw sand, and that was the end of that story. But that reminds me now, the sand pit was right around near where we could see the traffic lights. And that was a wonderful place for them all to be taught what colour is the light. If it's red, what do you do? If it's orange, what do you do? And if it's green, what do you do? And then you stop both ways, look both ways, and then you hold someone's hand and walk across. And that makes me think then of Sergeant Bob Bowman. He was at the police station, and I asked him to come down and to help me. Well, he was outstanding. I can remember one time when he brought round a great long pile of black plastic, and it had the white marks on it for crossing the street, which we put down, and everybody was looking around like mad. Sergeant Bob came in, he took out everything out of his pockets and he rolled up his pants so that he was a boy, and he did handstands, he ran across, he stood and shouted, he did everything that you shouldn't do on a crossing. And of course everybody's there having his complete attention, which was wonderful. Is that the way you go past a crossing? No. So then he got down on his knees and he held my hand and we walked properly across the crossing, looking both ways. And that was absolutely wonderful. Then he invited them up to his office and they had to make sure they had someone's hand to hold. They had to go all through the street lights up to his office, which was different from where it is now. And I didn't go with them. I stayed to help some of the ones who couldn't go. And I believe they had to knock on the door and tell them who they were, and they wanted to see Sergeant Bob. He came out, I believe, and welcomed them into his office and showed them what he did and how everything was, and then sent them home again. And I particularly remembered, look, can I have a couple of your police hats? Yes, because we had a couple of boys who had come from a very, very different household, and some of the comments about policemen weren't all that little children should have. So, but after Sergeant Bob had been down and done all this work, I had 2 police hats on the dress-up stand. And these 2 boys have got these hats on next time, hands in pockets, and they're walking around being policemen for the day. We had the fire brigade came down and they used to let them have a turn. We had water everywhere, but we also had littlies learning about water and how marvellous it was. Safety, wash your hands. This is the way we wash our hands, and this is the way we scrub our feet. This is the way we did all sorts of things. And particularly we were realising then that it was not all that good to be teaching children safety unless the mums knew about it too. So then we used to put our safety lesson on. Father Godfrey Gilmore and Angela were very good at that when we were having morning tea, so that the mums came in and they were taught, firstly, make sure that in the laundry there wasn't soap that was low and all the sorts of things, keeping things up high. Mums keeping the handle of a hot stove round so that it wasn't easy for children to hold. Pardon me. And then Godfrey and Angela were very, very good. I didn't see all of their lessons, but some of the mothers and the children came together and they were talking about mothering, which was wonderful for them as well. Well, officially it started in 22nd of February 1990, and we were going then officially for quite some time. Some funding was coming through from the government, and then apparently some funding was coming through for the church, and for various reasons, of which I am not sure, they had to change the name, pardon me, and it became ASCM, the Anglicare Safe Kids, and M for Maryborough. And then it proceeded under that name for quite some time. And I see with this picture that I was glad to receive at the Toy Library yesterday says 10 years of safety education was celebrated yesterday at the Anglicare Safe Kids of Maryborough. The group, formerly known as the Maryborough Safety Play Group, was formed in the city's Toy Library, pardon me, by Lesley Cairns and volunteers from the Maryborough Anglican Parish. So that gives it officially when it was, and there's a lovely photo there of Alan Brown with all the little children. Plasticine was marvellous, and to try to help things along a bit, to make, when they had finished, instead of screwing it all up in a ball together, we could say, well, we'll put all those pink people over there together and all of these green people over here together. So we had it back in balls instead of just one mass of going on. And of course the exercise of rolling your hands, everything seemed to go around rolling your hands or rolling something else or moving your head. It seemed to be, well, it was a very popular place to be, let me put it that way. And still, I can see someone in the street who says to me, hello, you taught me when I was little at the Safety Play Group. And it's wonderful to see children who did come to the Safety Play Group that are doing very well in sport, that are doing very well everywhere. As a matter of fact, did I say that I know of one young lass who's at university now, and they all started off through the safety play group, which to my way was a very important place to be. And as I said, I'm extremely grateful that each year the council, and it's no longer the Maryborough Council, allowed the use of it. But now there is nothing, I'm told, when it closed, it's been closed for nearly 2 years. I was only just told that the funding was no longer available. Not that we ever had a lot of funding. When the first bit of funding came through, someone asked me, "And how much are you getting a week for this, Lesley?" And I said, $75. And he said, "Did you say 75 or 750? But it was 75, and we shared that out with fruit, fresh fruit and anything that they needed for some time. Kerrie was there for 28 years, I think, before she retired, and they did a lot of work with disabilities, and later on they took anything that was needed to groups of people to the special school, down in Hervey Bay, and mums with children of disabilities could come in and look. There's a huge range of toys down there. I had a quick look yesterday, and it's amazing what you can borrow from the toy library, and I think you can take it home for quite a while. If we had anyone borrowing things from the toy library, and in those days there was a two-wheeler bike that you could borrow for at least 1 week, possibly 2, and if you'd really looked after it, you had a chance of taking it home again. And a computer would come in the early days to borrow a computer. That was really something. And it still is going on, and it's all not just toys, but things, all sorts of equipment to help people with their disability are still available in the toy library, and you can come in. And I don't know so much about who's doing it now, but I would go down there sometimes, and Kerrie was loading out her van to take toys and equipment to other people. As I said, the special school here, and she used to go down to Hervey Bay, and I presume that there is still someone doing all those wonderful things. As I said, the heads of the toy library, Ruth was Ruth Barnes was a lovely head. Kerrie was there as the next in line, and then when Ruth retired, Kerrie took over, and Kerrie was just so popular, doing wonderful, wonderful things for ever so many people, and it met the needs tremendously. I might say now that once I had a dear little girl that was brought in for weeks and weeks, and I could not encourage her to speak. Nothing at all that I could think up or suggest would teach her to speak. And then one day there was a man coming up to the Thursday markets, and he had a puppy that he was going to bring up and put on the stall to sell, and he handed it over the fence to us, to this dear little girl. And the reaction was wonderful. She cuddled that dog and laughed until she cried, and she hugged that dog like mad, and then gradually we had a couple of words that she would share with us, but then sadly we lost her. She went elsewhere, I believe, and I do hope that someone else was encouraging her the way we had been doing. I enjoyed it immensely the whole time that I was there. Sometimes it was heartbreak, but then all of us would sit down and have a cup of tea and a chat afterwards, and that was a very, very important part of the program, to be talking what had happened and how they had reacted to it, and could we have done it in a different way. I remember once, one little boy who was very, very upset, and I found out that by letting the tap run and letting him wash his hands, Oh, he was as happy as Larry. So I said, well, there you are. You can go in there and quietly let the tap run and play. But next week, Dad was in and said, Lesley, we live on a property and we have a tank. And it's not a good idea to be encouraging him to be playing with the water. So there was a learning experience. Well, there always is in every situation, isn't there? I always say if you go somewhere and do something, you always learn something to bring back. And it was a wonderful, wonderful time.